What if the biggest risk in your AI transformation isn't the technology? It's whether your people believe it will actually work. Today's guest has spent decades measuring the invisible forces that make or break technology adoption: beliefs, emotions, and behaviors. Ted Wolf from Guidewise AI joins me to share how his Changeworks platform is helping organizations navigate AI disruption by understanding what's really happening beneath the surface. We have a lot to cover, so let's dive in. Ted, welcome to Courage to Advance.
I'm happy to be here. Look forward to the conversation.
I do as well. So let's start from the beginning. How did Guidewise come to be, and what problem did you realize needed solving that no one else was addressing?
Years ago, my brother and I worked for IBM. We left because we wanted to be entrepreneurs. We started a technical consulting and staffing company and started with a total of $1,000 and had no experience when it comes to hiring, managing, or letting people go. So we made a lot of mistakes along the way, but through those mistakes, we learned that people are pretty key in what you need to have happen within a business to make it successful. So we completely turned from a production-oriented, I'll say, driven business to a value-driven business. And long story short, can fill you in a lot of the mistakes and details in our conversation today. But 18 years later, we had 650 billable people across the United States in 13 offices, and it was acquired by Iron Mountain Corporation. So I had an awful lot of background, if you will, in building a business and talking to people and getting them to adjust to change and motivate, et cetera, and develop them into managers. And after we were acquired, I started a coaching company and developed a whole platform on concepts, education for coaching and people adopting to change. One of the things I noticed was in our business, we probably implemented over 300 ERP systems. And in doing that, people adoption was the main thing. The technology worked, the business needs were there, but people just resisted the change and had to learn how to do that. So that brings me to the next point in how we got started. My son graduated from Penn State and was in cybersecurity and technology and worked for Deloitte Consulting in that area. So he and I talked and said, let's join forces. He's the technology brains behind Guidewise, and I'm going to say I have the experience with building the business and change management with people, change adoption with people. And that's how we got started. And we are probably 4 years into it now and worked very heavily on this whole change management, in particular, people adoption to change.
And it's really focused around AI in particular, correct? Or is it many different types of change that organizations might be facing?
Well, we focus on two things. Number one, right now we're focused on AI because it's such a big impact on businesses and their culture. And it's not just technology you have to worry about. And this is a different type of technology that we've never seen before in implementing in a business. So what we're doing is we're focusing on implementing AI, but then the second part of what we do is getting people to use AI. We found in implementing a lot of ERP systems and any technology, people have workarounds, silos don't want to get broken down, the rumor mill takes over. People generally don't know how to manage to get people to change in that change initiative. So we saw that as a major opportunity in the market, and that's what we went after, and that's what we're focused on. But the two things we do, implement AI and then get people to use it. But the whole change management and change adoption, it doesn't matter what the business obstacles are. If you have low engagement and you got a gap between what your expectations are and what the implementation reality is, you have a need for change management, change adoption initiatives.
I think that's such an important factor in anything organizations are dealing with, especially as how quickly change is happening. And so I know we'll dive into the nuance a little bit more as we continue our conversation. One of the things that you've written about in the past has been this term you coined, kind of pilot purgatory, which I completely can understand and relate to. And you talk about it from this place of where these companies are cycling through these AI pilots in particular. And I think it would be really interesting how, you also mentioned where it's like eroding trust. So I'd be really fascinated to have you talk a little bit about, a picture of maybe what does it look like when a company is kind of done this. So maybe listeners will get a sense of if they're in that purgatory, as you describe it.
Yeah, pilot purgatory principally is you have a poor use case example. It's not tied to a business objective or a business plan to implement new technology or whatever the change is. And then basically not really being able to get people behind the initiatives. And that's because of a breakdown in communication and a number of other things. But overall, though, what we're looking for is an organization that has a business objective that they want to achieve. They develop the pilot, and one of the things many organizations do that's incorrect is they'll just develop pilots independently throughout the business. Small little initiatives. Sales does this. Marketing has their own pilot, AI pilot that they want to put in. Accounting has one, operations has one, and they're not talking with each other. There's no way to get a broad-based consensus of the effort and the messaging and communication of what you're doing. So that really hurts. And if people do not use it, that's obviously pilot purgatory. What changes that is being able to answer the who, what, where, when, and why of change. So people can begin processing it. Why is this change being put in place? The use case, what's the outcome that we're looking for, and what are the metrics that are going to be able to show that? If you can't put that in place and have a good business objective that you're trying to influence, and you embed AI in that objective with common metrics, you're going to have a difficult time getting AI implemented, and it will be that purgatory. Like, when is this going to end? I have no idea. When are we going to get the payoff? And a timeline needs to be put in place.
It makes sense, and yet it's so common right now, right? Like everybody's trying it at different stages inside their organization, and I think that's certainly something even inside our own organization. We've found pockets that really have great adoption and pockets that are still not quite there. We recently did research on the state of organizational trust, and we found something that was probably won't surprise you in the work you do. But what really quantifies like what you're describing, for us, we saw that AI-driven system changes were the most common disruptor that organizations are facing. And yet they weren't the biggest trust breaker. We saw things like leadership turnover and job redesign hitting trust much harder. So what do you think that tells us about why AI implementations fail from that human, perspective in those ways? And is it actually about the AI, or is it more about the whole how they set up the process and the planning and who goes into it initially?
I don't think it's the technology. I think it's a cultural thing. It's hitting organizations in many different ways. For the most part, with AI, you share a lot of information between departments. Information becomes very democratized, I'll say. Silos don't like that. They like holding their own information. Generally speaking, when you have a business meeting, you have the first part of that meeting where everybody just kind of updates their understanding, and it's almost like a tax on people's times because we're rehashing everything all over again. So I think there's poor communication, poor goal setting, people not understanding how the impact of AI is on their culture and the role culture has to play in being able to have a successful implementation and experience. So when trust begins to erode, to me, that means people, organization, leadership, did not communicate very well why the change is necessary and what the impact is going to be on workflow and day-to-day tasks that need to be done, reporting structures. And if you don't put that in place with governance, and some of this might be rules-oriented, but just governance of who can use this agent, who can't use the agent, who's responsible for prompting and building the, I'm going to use the word character with air quotes, the character of the agent. You have to be able to orchestrate all of this at different levels, because most people go into an AI implementation, I believe, and they think one agent will do everything, whereas it shouldn't be put in place that way because we don't hire people that way. You have an individual that manages, you have another individual that does it, you have another individual that's in quality control that oversees everything. You got another one in accounting to make sure all your costs are in line. The same thing happens with AI and pilots. You have different tasks that they specialize in, and that's orchestrating. And that's throughout the organization at many different levels, because you're going to have If you don't do that, you're going to have a swarm of agents competing against each other.
Mm-hmm.
And all they're going to do is replicate and speed up the chaos in the organization much faster, and it poses a much bigger problem.
So let's dive a little bit deeper into, you talk about the change management aspect of Guidewise. And if for somebody listening who says, oh, we already have a change management, process or methodology or whatever, talk a little bit more specifically about why this is so different and what it's really getting at.
Number one, most change initiatives fail. And that's documented by Harvard Business School, the review, McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group. They say about 70% of change initiatives fail. Not because the business objective wasn't a good one, not because technology didn't work, but it's because of people's resistance. So that means there's a huge, huge difference between ideas, which ideas are easy, and implementation so you can execute. Implementation is the tough part of all of this. So how do you get it implemented? People create project plans to implement the technology, but they don't create a change adoption plan. In project management, you have things like, what's the impact? What's the readiness? What are the resources you're going to use? And you need all of that information to make a change initiative successful. But the tail end of the change initiative is people's inner game. It's the inner game enablement. What are my beliefs about this change? They're telling me why it's important, but do I believe them? Do I trust what they're telling me? Do they have my best interests? Are they telling me the truth, or are they just telling me design this so I can replace you next year? Because everybody's reading the news. Everybody's reading about how layoffs are coming. And inevitably, this means we're going to move into a dual workforce in some way. We're going to have human workforces, employees, and we're going to have agentic workforces or agents who combine and are governed at different levels, specific tasks that need to be done. And we're going to be working in tandem. That's that dual workforce that we talk about.
I think what's so important and critical with what you're sharing is it's that we, as just human beings, right, we tell ourselves stories that support our own belief systems, and we gather that information that supports what we believe, especially if we're having those conversations more in our head and not actually trying to engage and understand. And I think when we have so much coming at us, it's a human nature, or maybe it's a sense of a protective mechanism. And I think what is very fascinating about what you all are doing is it's tapping into more of that belief system, as you say, the emotions, the things that are just the fight or flight that gets in our way of actually understanding at a deeper level where the benefits are to us.
Yeah.
And that does feel very different.
Yeah. Well, no matter how an organization operates today, it's going to be impacted by AI. And people have to be able to sit back and say, hey, it's going to change a lot of things, but we don't know everything that is going to impact and change. So we have to build a resilient culture.
Yes.
And that culture means we can make some failures, but we need to learn because we need to innovate. And you don't get innovation without some failure, some level of failure. So people have to become a little tolerant of that, but they also have to be able to say to themselves, are we answering those basic questions, the who, what, where, when, why, and how this is all going to take place and how's it going to affect me? If we don't look at that, we don't get the micro level of change that a business needs. Usually change initiatives start at the senior level. They say we want to implement AI. Here's how we're going to do it. And some people say, just put them in there and just let everybody experiment. And then we'll choose what we want and see what works. But it doesn't really work that way. So you have the macro directive that goes down to what I'll call the great middle or the middle management level. Then they're responsible for implementing it with the people that are the frontline workers. What happens is it breaks down in communication and the trust then starts to erode. And once your trust starts to erode, it's a long, difficult road to come back because you can spend years earning trust, but it really takes one decision and one bad day or one bad conversation to completely destroy all the trust that was put in place.
Completely agree. So do you have an example you can share where the work you do surfaced something that completely changed how a leader, understood what was actually happening during their AI rollout?
Organizations will come in and they'll say this is, the IT department takes over the entire,
Yep.
I'll say, implementation of AI. So they look at it as another IT project.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not really trained in it. They don't have a lot of cultural finesse, I'll say sometimes. They're engineers, and we need that. That's an important ingredient, but we need more than that within the organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So they need to get a group of people together in different departments, and they'll say, well, we do that in IT. But they leave the emotional or the person, the human tendency and the human need to belong to something where they can feel safe and secure. That's right out of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So they don't build the team properly, and they start managing things from an IT perspective. I would say think that through a little bit more. What gets John or Jane Doe out of bed in the morning and wanting to come into work?
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily to work on a new technology. Some people don't like technology. Some people don't trust technology. They never did. Some people think technology makes work more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Results are more difficult to get. I'm going to go back and cite the ERP example. How many ERP success stories are they? Consequently, right now, from what I read in research, about 30% of ERP implementations or CRM implementations are successful. It goes right back to that change initiative number again that we talked about from McKinsey and Boston Consulting Group. So they're not really taking the human factor and building in that inner game. At the macro level, they give the direction, middle management implements it, but at that frontline worker, you got to get into their inner game. They have to buy into it because they represent your company. And if it's all just a technical project, and it's not, well, we're going to develop through the business objective of designing a new customer and client experience that they're going to love, that means that that person has to engage in it emotionally, mentally. They got to believe in what the company's saying and it's the right thing to do. And then they got to figure out, okay, this is how it's going to benefit me in my career. So I'm really all in and engaged. Anything short of that, you're going to have difficulty putting in AI in the future.
I want to go just a little bit deeper because I think I've been having conversations with, HR leaders lately around trying to figure out where their, seat at the table, if you will, is in this AI world, because it's such any type of change, and certainly this type of change is so people impacting, from a very focused perspective. And yet there's so much, as you just described, often happening at, kind of being centered around the IT level. And it's not until well after these plans have been made that maybe HR is informed of, timelines or they have to insert themselves and say, hey, there's a few things you've missed. So what would, good look like in a sense of how would you say, if we were to structure this ahead of time, how do you get companies to realize HR has a very strong seat at the table, or should, because of the people impact, and that so that it's not too late?
Yeah. So here's where I believe, in my experience from implementing technology, AI is a little different and where the different departments come into play. When you have an IT project, you have a specific department or departments you're working with, and that's all that you work on. And it's a matter of how do we change workflow and get people working on this new workflow derived from technology. With AI, you need buy-in from the people. And that means you got to get HR involved. You may need to get accounting involved. You may need to get call center involved or customer success, customer service. You need to get different people involved because you're going to be using data from each one of those departments. And this is not just a technology implementation. Again, I'm going to go back. 30% succeed when it comes to change initiatives. Why do they succeed? And I'm looking for a model that I know works, that I can count on. And that model is we not only educate on the technology, but we help people process the change. That means we have to be able to get them to understand and adopt new belief systems. What the company's telling me is actually true. I trust it. We have to get them to develop and understand, well, here's the emotions that are dictating a lot of your behaviors. Behavior is the key. It's the ultimate key in implementing and building a successful company because, you got to get those beliefs, emotions, and the meaning of everything. What does it mean to me? What does it mean to the company? What does it mean to the client to implement AI? And what's that experience going to be like? If we don't adopt and use the human element of change, we aren't working at that macro level. We're working top down only, but not bottom up. We need to do both. We need to do both to make AI successful in an organization. And by the way, I think every organization is going to have to get in AI. If you wait too long, you're going to have to play catch up, and it's going to be too difficult. But you've got to do it in a thoughtful way, in a low risk, low cost environment, because implementing AI with the human aspect reduces the risk of failure.
If people are struggling with, like you said, right, I've talked to a lot of leaders this year that are still in the we're experimenting phase. And as you've really well described, that's not a good thing, perhaps, because that experimenting has a lot of dead ends. How do you approach coming in and starting a conversation with an organization that's in that we're experimenting phase level, just to get listeners a sense of like, how do they maybe open a door even inside their own organizations to invite Guidewise in?
Well, the first thing I ask them is, what's the outcome you want? And what business objective is this tied to? Why do you want to bring in AI, and what benefit do you want to see from a business standpoint? Okay, let's take a look at a business, number one. You take a look at a business and they say, we have financial obligations we have to hit. And we know we got a problem because every year, inflation and all kinds of things, all this change, they're impacting the business. And we can't do forecasting long term. We have to bring in more cash than we spend, or we got a problem. So we got to make investments that increase productivity. So cash flow and the need in a business dictates plans and strategy and business objectives that have to be achieved within a time frame. So then they say, how do we achieve this? Well, if they go immediately to productivity. I've got to figure out how to increase productivity, because without productivity, I don't make money. That means I got to control my costs and increase revenue. Well, productivity can actually address both of those issues if you think it through properly. So then they say, okay, we have this business need that we have to meet, financial obligations, number one. Number two, we can use technology. That's usually where they go for increases in productivity. And I think that's warranted. That's good. They do other things like offshoring, and we got to be careful about all that stuff today because of tariffs and everything else. But technology is usually they go to for increasing productivity. So that's number two. We go to technology to increase productivity. And number three, we got to get the people to use the technology, or we don't meet our financial obligations. So those three things create the platform they have to look for. What's the business objective and outcome you want to achieve? How's technology going to help you do that? When will you know you've arrived and you're successful, and you're not in pilot purgatory where the pilot is hallucinating and or making up stuff and just complimenting you and telling you how smart you are, because that's the way it's prompted and programmed to do in the large LLM. So you've got to be able to get that business case, and that's what I would ask them. What's the business outcome you want? How are you looking to use AI to get that done? Are you looking to plant 1,000 seeds and get flowers and then pick the right one, which is going to be a problem? Or are you actually thinking through how to orchestrate this with agents that there's a check and balance on all of it? They're checking on each other. They're verifying work. And then you have a person verifying what they're doing. And then finally, you got to be able to say, how are we going to get people to use this? And that's that micro level where you've got to get their inner game involved, or they do not make the change. If they don't adopt the change, that means they're not going to be as engaged. That means they're going to be making more mistakes, and they're tolerant when they don't improve. That means you've got a big problem, because that impacts your productivity. And without productivity increases, you're not going to make money. So all of a sudden, I'm back to the very beginning. I got a financial problem here that I thought we were going to address with AI, but we're not. It's actually costing us more money. And one of the other things I'll mention is with AI, it's not just technology that we're licensing, a seat or anything like that we did with all of the old technology that we've used in the last 40 and 50 years. You paid a license fee per user, and then you used it as much as you want. It's different with AI. You do pay a license fee, but then you pay usage fees on top of that, depending on how many tokens you use, et cetera, and that can get complicated. Mm-hmm. But you've got to have all of these things laid out, and we do it in a low-risk, low-cost environment to get your foot in the water. Don't adopt a lot of risk. Don't go all guns in before you know what you're even jumping into. Turns into a quicksand and you can't get out of it. So think it through. Low cost, business focus, business outcome, how you're using the technology and how are you going to get people to use the technology. That's what we drive for, and that's the solution that we bring in. You're bringing in AI to achieve a business objective. Now let's get the people to use AI. And most people don't talk about both of those things.
I really appreciate how clearly you've laid that out, even in those, conversations I've had this year where this is top of mind for leaders. If the idea is like, well, we have to do it because everybody is, or we can't avoid it, right? Which is not the answer to what you're asking, but that is often driving it. Or it's it's just simply we need to be more productive, and it stops there. And I think that's a very incomplete thought process, obviously, as you've laid out, and why so many people wind up in this, this purgatory, as you described it, versus really finding this to be something that can find its completion part with the adoption along the way. And I think that's what you laid out makes that really clear.
Well, Kim, I think there's another aspect. And Kim, you're a good business person. You've got success track record. You know the issues. You know how important trust is. Let me ask you a question. Would you ever go into a venture and not figure or be able to something you couldn't measure? You're just constantly putting money in, but you don't have measurements and metrics from the operation, the processes that are going to be put in place. You'd never do that, or you would never last in business. One thing we find aren't doing really well is they're not developing human-centered metrics, people metrics. They're not gathering metrics, and I'm inferring here HR. They do a great job, and I think HR is really important in many, many organizations. And it's unfortunately turning in, I think, very much to a compliant type of department. Yeah. We're just in compliance with things. Versus, I think the original intent is how do we build people and develop them, their skill sets? How do we build and introduce change into the organization? Because I think the number one issue right now, and it will be this way for a number of years, is change. Mm-hmm. How do we manage and direct change to our advantage versus our disadvantage? So how do we begin to think and innovate so we force change on others versus us adapting to the change that they introduce? Well, one of the things, HR will say, well, we call offs on per shift. We look at turnover. That's another metric. That's a good one, they say. And then, paid leave of absence and, people not showing up, or even I'll say engagement levels are low. That's nice, but that's not the people thing that you need to get to for AI. They're not the metrics. You need metrics like, what are their belief systems? Mm-hmm. Let's just take a look. Very common thing. If I believe I have the talent to do what I need to do in my job, but I believe the company will not do what they need to do to make me successful, I got a problem. I can do it, but they can't do it. So if we can get metrics that will tell us and monitor belief systems, and we can do it, we figured out how to do it in our organization and what we use to implement feedback loops and everything. I can basically identify their beliefs, and then I know where to go where I can say, you feel confident that you can do it, and you feel confident the business will do what they're saying they'll do. Again, going back to trust. I trust the company will do what they need to do. All of a sudden, my engagement level goes up automatically. So I need to know how to get at that behavior. Then I need to understand, what are their emotions? Let's just use project management. You might use one of the typical systems that are out there. We use Asana in our own business. I can lay out a project, and I can do everything really well in that project, but it tells me nothing of how I feel about the project. Am I excited about it? Do I think it's worthwhile? Am I wasting my time? Is this all BS that we're doing and everything else? So the person managing the problem or the project has all kinds of data on the project, but nothing about the end user on the project that they're implementing. Mm-hmm. So they're operating in the dark. We need new metrics. One of those other metrics of emotions. What are the emotional patterns you see in a business? Let's look at this. If a business is breaking down in utilization and they're not getting their AI implemented properly, they got to go back and ask, well, what's the emotions behind it? Anybody that's been in sales knows that sales is all psychology and emotion. Buyer's remorse is after I make the decision, emotional decision to buy it. Now I'm looking at the facts and I have doubts and I may regret this because now I recognize I didn't make my decision on logic and reason, but emotion. So we got to be able to go back and say, what are the emotional patterns? We can show significant changes in emotional patterns, and that will give you the key on how you need to communicate change to people to get their emotions and their belief systems in alignment with what you want to do. And that's just working in change initiatives at the micro level. And then finally, you got to come back and say, what's it all mean? And it should be tied around career advancement. You're not going to lose your job. It's going to be different. You're going to manage an agentic workforce. You may be managing 10 agents, and that's no different than managing 10 employees. You got to check on their work. You got to onboard them properly, and that's what you need to do with an agent. You got to be able to have policies that they follow, business policies, employment policies, et cetera, et cetera. You need to have the business, and all of those accountability initiatives put in place. If you do that, you'll have a good project, you have a good experience, but the most important thing you do, you need to develop people metrics. We, in our platform, which we call Changeworks, we developed a technology, and the technology basically will give us 40 different new metrics that we've been able to create out of all the data that we have now on people. And that is enough to begin really fine-tuning communication messages, accountability, finding out where the project itself is faltering and why, and how people can bring that back. It's people-driven. That's the key behind AI right now.
I think that's such an important message to wrap up on, because this is something that it doesn't feel people driven. And I really appreciate how you've laid out for us a different way of getting people to get their arms around how do they bring this in a way that's going to be effective and doesn't feel like another big hurdle to take on. So I really appreciate this conversation, Ted. And I want to make sure people have an opportunity to know how to get in touch with you and Guidewise if they want to learn more.
Well, you can certainly go to guidewise.ai. That's Guidewise, one word, .ai. That's our website, and that's one way to contact us. And you can certainly go to information at Guidewise, but they can also email me directly, ted@guidewise.ai.
Wonderful. And I assume connecting on LinkedIn is a big piece too that we always encourage people to do. Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Thank you again so much for the conversation. We'll make sure all of these links are in the notes for people as well. And again, Ted, appreciate you taking the time to help educate us all on how this could be a much smoother path forward.
Well, thank you for the opportunity and the platform. And I really enjoyed the conversation with you. I always enjoy talking with you.
You as well, Ted. Thank you. For our listeners, we have resources relevant to our conversation today that you can access by visiting couragetoadvancepodcast.com, and of course, links in the show notes. And remember to like and follow our podcast on your favorite platform so more leaders can benefit from these conversations. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Courage to Advance, where transformative leadership isn't about having all the answers, it's about having the courage to find them.